Last week I was in La Rioja, so in this video I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Rioja wine region and also discuss some of my favorite producers and what I learned during some of my tastings last week. Why Rioja? Well, there's some exceptional wines being produced in Rioja. They've also had a couple recent strong vintages, so now is a great time to be purchasing Rioja wines. Also, as I frequently advise on this channel, it's oftentimes a good idea for most wine collectors to have a diversified wine collection. For that reason, I think it's a good idea to have at least 5 to 10% of Spanish wines, certainly a significant percentage of which could be Rioja wines, in your collection. But I actually think that may be a little bit too low. As I'll discuss in this video, there's some exceptional wines being made in Rioja, many of which are extraordinary values relative to other collectible wines. The other great thing about Rioja wines is while they're collectible and age-worthy in their own right, they also have a number of excellent cellar defenders. This is so because many of the producers offer some entry-level wines that offer compelling value, but some of the traditional producers also make some wines, such as Reservas and Gran Reservas, that have extended aging and which are ready to enjoy on release. There's also a wide variety of Rioja wines being produced, including a number of exciting white wines and also some rosé. So regardless of whether you enjoy traditional producers, modern producers, red wine, or white wine, there's a number of high-quality options at a variety of price points. Before I discuss some of my favorite Rioja producers, a brief overview of the Rioja wine region is instructive. Rioja is a wine region in northern Spain with diverse soils and microclimates that are largely influenced by both the Ebro River and mountain ranges to both the north and the south. These mountains are critical because they help to form a valley which hopes to shield Rioja from some of the Atlantic influence to the north, as well as from the hot air from central Spain to the south. Rioja is governed by the Consejo Regulador, which helps to establish rules and requirements for things like vineyard practices, maturation for wines, the grape varieties that can be used, and so forth. Rioja was first recognized as a DO way back in 1925, and in 1991, it received the extra prestigious status of DOCa. Currently, both Rioja and Priorat are the only regions in Spain that have this DOCa status. It's important to remember, too, that Rioja is not just one monolithic area. Rather, there's 3 different subregions, specifically Rioja Alta, Alavesa, and Rioja Oriental, which used to be known as Rioja Baja. Rioja Alta and Rioja Alavesa tend to have vineyards that are in a little bit of a cooler climate because they have more elevation, and in contrast, Rioja Oriental has a number of low-lying vineyards and is generally much warmer. When it comes to red grapes that can be used for wine in Rioja, Tempranillo is dominant with 88% of plantings for red. Garnacha is second with around 8% of red plantings. Some of the producers that I talked to mentioned that they're planting a little bit more Garnacha recently because it tends to handle some of the hotter temperatures that they've been receiving a little bit better than some of the other red grapes. Graciano makes up around 2% of the plantings, and it tends to add some acidity, some black fruit, and some tannic structure to the blends. Mizuelo, which is also known as Carignan in other parts of the world, is also a significant grape in Rioja and helps to add some acidity and freshness to the blends. There's also a permitted red grape that's called Maturana Tinto, but that makes up less than 0.5% of total red plantings. While many people associate Rioja with exclusively red wines, there's also some exceptional white wines being produced. There's 9 different grapes that are permitted to be used in white wines. Certainly the most significant of them is Viura, which is also known as Macabeo in other parts of Spain. Viura makes up around 68% of plantings for white grapes in Rioja. Along with Viura, the most significant white grapes used in Rioja include Tempranillo Blanco, Garnacha Blanca, and Malvasia. In addition to red wines and white wines, there's also a number of Rioja producers that are making both rosé and sparkling wines. On labels for Rioja, you may see terms like Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva. These are terms that have specific definitions associated with the maturation requirements. It should be noted that these are minimum aging requirements, and producers are always free to mature their wines longer than what is set forth in the regulations. There's also different maturation requirements for both red wines and either white wines or rosé. When it comes to crianza, in terms of red wines, this means that the wine has to mature for a minimum of 24 months, 12 months of which must be in oak. Reserva means that the wine must mature for at least 36 months, 12 months of which must be in oak, and 6 months of which must be in bottle. In terms of Gran Reservas, red wines must be matured for a minimum of 60 months, 24 months of which must be in oak, and 24 months of which must be in bottle. In terms of white wines and rosés, the maturation requirements are more relaxed. For example, white wine and rosé crianza must mature for 6 months minimum in oak barrels. Reservas must mature for 24 months, 6 months of which must be in oak barrel. Gran Reserva white wines and rosés must mature for 48 months, and again, 6 months of that time minimum must be in oak barrel. It's important to note that these maturation classifications do not necessarily correspond to quality. This is so because other production methods are not regulated. So there's no requirement, for example, that a producer use their best quality fruit for Gran Reservas, or that they use a specific selection process, and so on. So for example, you could have a situation where a top producer makes a crianza that's an outstanding wine and which exceeds the quality of a Gran Reserva from some other producer. If you're wondering about the strength of some of the various vintages in Rioja over the years, it's important to note that the Consejo Regulador does rate the vintages annually. These range on a scale from normal to good to very good to excellent. Some of my favorite all-time excellent vintages include 1964 and 1994. Some of the more recent vintages that received excellent status include 2001, 2004, 2005, 2010 and 11, and 2019. It should be noted, however, that these vintage ratings take into account all 3 of the subregions in Rioja. So in a number of vintages, there could be some outstanding wines that are made in a vintage that is just considered to be very good. This is so because the conditions, especially for a producer that relies primarily on estate wines, could be very different from a producer that sources fruit from all 3 subregions in Rioja. Marques de Murrieta is a world-class producer that was founded way back in 1852. This historic producer is located near Logroño in the Rioja Alta subzone. Marques de Murrieta has a massive 740-hectare estate with numerous single vineyards. These single vineyards have diverse soil types, and they're located at elevations ranging from 320 to 485 meters above sea level. The Marques de Murrieta vineyards are divided into around 60 parcels, each of which are farmed separately, and the fruit from each of these parcels is also vinified separately, which gives them tremendous ability to be precise with their blending. Marques de Murrieta uses an extremely strict selection process. In addition to making a selection of fruit in the vineyard and discarding fruit that does not meet their standards, they also use optical sorting equipment, and they also do separate density testing as well. In 2021, Marques de Murrieta completed a brand new state-of-the-art winery. They're extremely innovative with their winemaking. In fact, they have 5 different patents on different technology used in the winemaking process. For example, one of the patents is for a unique punch-down machine that allows the grapes to be punched down without breaking the skins. This is an extremely gentle technique and is one reason that the Marques de Murrieta wines have such silky, refined tannins even in their youth. Marques de Murrieta has a massive wine cellar that stores an incredible 9 million liters of wine, 6 million of which are in bottle, and another 3 million of which are in barrel. The wines are only released when they are ready to drink, and their higher-end wines are only produced if they meet their lofty standards. If not, the fruit is declassified and it goes into a bottling that's a lower-cost wine. With that by way of background, I'll briefly discuss each of the wines in the Marques de Murrieta lineup, the first of which is their flagship wine, the Marques de Murrieta Reserva. This is a wine that's produced every single vintage. It's their highest production wine by far. This wine is always a Tempranillo dominant blend, and it typically also includes some Graciano, Mizuelo, and a small amount of Garnacha. The 2021 vintage is the current release, and it's absolutely a tremendous effort. This wine is an incredible value at around $25 to $30 per bottle. For a wine at this modest price point, this wine was extremely well received by critics, and it also held its own during an impressive tasting lineup that I had at the winery. In fact, it's hard for me to identify any other wine in the world that offers more value at around the $25 or $30 price point than the 2021 Marques de Murrieta Reserva. This wine has pronounced aromatic intensity and flavors and aromas that include mixed red fruit, cedar, and floral notes. There's ample acidity and freshness, and silky refined tannins. This is a wine that you can enjoy immediately, but it's also capable of aging for an extended period of time. In fact, just a couple years ago, I had some expressions of this wine back from the 1980s, and they were still showing well. Next up is the Marques de Murrieta Gran Reserva. The current release is from the cooler 2016 vintage. This wine is around 82% Tempranillo, and there's smaller amounts of Graciano and Mizuelo. This is an extremely impressive wine. It matures for around 26 months in American oak and spends the rest of its time in bottle before it is released. Compared to the Reserva, this wine just has a little bit more of everything. This wine was highly acclaimed and received favorable scores from all the critics who reviewed it. It sells for around $75 per bottle in the United States. In vintages where an exceptional wine can be produced, Marques de Murrieta also produces the Castillo Ygay Gran Reserva. The current release is the 2012 vintage. The fruit for this special wine comes from a single vineyard with very old vines that average more than 80 years of age. It's called the Plana, and it's at the highest elevation within the Ygay estate. The 2012 vintage is a blend that consists of 81% Tempranillo and 19% Mizuelo. The Tempranillo matures for 34 months in 225-liter American oak barrels, while the Mizuelo matures in French barriques. After blending, this wine matures for another year in concrete, followed by at least 2 more years in bottle, and is only released once it's ready to drink. Of course, while you can enjoy this wine now, particularly with a healthy decant, this is an extraordinarily age-worthy wine. In fact, at the winery, I tried the 1968, and it was absolutely phenomenal. So this is a wine that can age for decades effortlessly and will be there and be ready to enjoy whenever you want to open it. As mentioned, the current release is the 2012 vintage. This is truly one of the elite wines that's made in the entire world. It sells for around $275 per bottle. They also produced this wine in 2010 and also 2011. It's extremely unusual for them to produce 3 vintages in a row, and in fact, they won't produce another one until the 2016 vintage. So if you have any interest in the Castillo Ygay Gran Reservas, you definitely want to act now and make sure you stock up on these last 3 vintages, because there's going to be a long drought ahead. Marques de Murrieta also produces another world-class wine that's called Dalmo. This is a wine that was first produced in the 1994 vintage. Somewhat unusually, this wine even includes Cabernet Sauvignon in the blend. Cabernet Sauvignon is extremely rare in Rioja, and these vines are grandfathered in due to their extreme age, so they are not able to replant them. This wine comes from fruit that's located in a single vineyard that's located at fairly high elevation, around 465 meters above sea level. This single vineyard is called Canajes, and it's dominant in Tempranillo, which typically comprises around 80% of the blend. The Cabernet Sauvignon is oftentimes around 10 to 15%, and then there's smaller amounts of Graciano as well. This wine is very much made in a modern style and is definitely fruit-forward and elegant. It matures for around 17 months in French oak barriques, and then another 13 months or so in concrete vats. I tried the 2020 vintage, which is showing well already, but which certainly has a long life ahead of it. This wine features flavors and aromas that include mixed blue and black fruit, floral notes, and mixed spice. All the Marques de Murrieta wines that I've discussed so far have been red wines, but they also make one of the truly elite white wines in the world, and it's called Capellania. Capellania is 100% Viura, and this Viura comes from extremely old vines, some of which were planted more than 100 years ago. The Capellania vineyard is around 15 hectares, and it's planted at the highest elevation on the Igai estate, around 485 meters above sea level. One quick side note, viewers of this channel and fans of Marques de Murrieta are undoubtedly aware that in extremely special vintages, Marques de Murrieta produces a Castillo Igai Gran Reserva Blanco. When that happens, this is the fruit that goes into that wine. The most recent vintage was 1986. Currently, they're considering whether or not to release a 1998 vintage of the Castillo Igai Blanco Gran Reserva Especial. But at least as of the time I visited the winery about a week ago, no decision has been made yet as to whether they will produce that wine, and if so, when it will be released. For those of you who have tried the Castillo Igai Gran Reserva Blanco, this Capellania wine is definitely a little bit different. This wine has been made since 2001 or so, and this wine is less oxidative. It's a little bit more fresh and fruit forward, and there's less oak influence. In fact, when I was at the winery, I saw the 2025 vintage of Capellania fermenting in concrete. Current release is the 2019 vintage, which was well received by critics. This is a mineral-driven wine that features flavors and aromas of apple, pear, citrus, blossom, and herbs, with ample acidity and a long lingering finish. While Bodegas Roda was founded back in 1987 and is quite young relative to some of the other producers that I'm discussing in this video, it's already making world-class wines and some of my favorite wines, not just in Rioja, but in all of Spain. Roda was founded by people who had some experience importing very high-end wines, such as Sassicaia, and who thus had very sophisticated palates. So their idea was to produce wine that was made in more of a French style, with an emphasis on the quality of the fruit and less focus on the length of the maturation. And they decided to do this with an emphasis from fruit from old vines. While Bodegas Roda necessarily had to start out quite small, they've been adding to their vineyard holdings over the years, and now they've divided their plots into around 64 different parcels, which they farm sustainably. They also emphasize a sustainable approach in the winery as well. Bodegas Roda now has a total production of around 350,000 bottles annually. During my visit, I was able to sit down and taste through their entire lineup. The first wine that I tried was their entry-level wine, which is called Bodegas Roda Cellar. This is a wine that sells for around 18 to 20 euros and around $30, perhaps a bit less, in the United States. This is a wine that's only been produced for around 12 to 15 years or so. This wine is now in extremely high demand as it offers extraordinary quality for this price point. The 2023 vintage that I tried was extremely enjoyable. That wine is 95% Tempranillo and 5% Garnacha. It's a wine that's extremely pleasurable now, and there's no need to wait to enjoy it, but it certainly will age effortlessly for 5 to 6 more years with no problems at all. With respect to its red wines, Bodegas Roda makes 2 different reservas. Interestingly, they found that some of the fruit in their vineyard produced more of a red fruit profile, whereas some of their older vines, perhaps from higher elevation sites, made wine in more of a black fruit profile. Rather than blending these 2 different styles together, they decided to bottle them separately. And so the Reserva with a red fruit profile is called Bodegas Roda. Meanwhile, the fruit with a darker profile that comes from some of their older vines goes into a wine that's called Bodegas Roda 1. If you're not able to remember which is which, they make it easy for you because all you have to do is look at the capsule. Bodegas Roda has a red capsule and Bodegas Roda 1 has a black capsule. These wines are both Tempranillo dominant, and they sometimes include smaller amounts of Graciano and Garnacha as well. Bodegas Roda matures for around 14 months in 40% new oak, and Bodegas Roda 1 matures for slightly longer in oak, around 16 months or so. Bodegas Roda is slightly less expensive, as that one sells for around €40 or around $55 to $60 in the United States. Meanwhile, Bodegas Roda 1 sells for closer to $85 or $90 in the United States. I tried both the 2020 and 2021 vintages of Bodegas Roda. I enjoyed both of them. The 2021 certainly shows a lot of potential and has a little bit more complexity to it. It's definitely one that will improve with some additional bottle age. The 2020 comes from a vintage that's not quite as heralded, but this wine was absolutely delicious. So if you're looking for a wine to enjoy in the near term, I definitely would not hesitate to get the 2020 Bodegas Roda. While I tend to enjoy the Bodegas Roda with less age on it, when it's a little bit more flamboyant and fruity, the Bodegas Roda 1 is definitely capable of extended aging. I still remember trying the 1994 Bodegas Roda 1, and that wine was extremely memorable. When I was at the winery, I tried the 2004 and the 2007 vintages, in addition to the 2019. Despite the fact that the 2007 vintage was panned on release, that wine was showing a little bit better than the highly acclaimed 2004 vintage when I tried it. That's not because the 2004 was disappointing. Rather, I think that with these wines that are produced from very old vines, sometimes it can take some of the wines from the cooler vintages a little bit more in terms of bottle age before they show their best. Back in 1995, Bodegas Roda made a significant discovery. They were harvesting some of the grapes from some of their very old vines, and when tasting some of those grapes, they found that there was a subset of those grapes that tasted more like a Finnish wine. Ultimately, they got the idea to take some of those grapes and make a wine with them. So in 1998, they produced the first vintage of Bodegas Roda, Sursion. This is a very special wine that's made in only top vintages. The 2021 vintage is the current release, and it's an extremely special wine that I was fortunate to get to taste at the winery. I was surprised to learn that this wine matures only for around 8 months in oak. This wine is extraordinarily elegant, and there's definitely an emphasis on the purity of the fruit. The tannins are silky, and there's a long, refined finish. Really an extremely special, enjoyable wine. Beginning in 2019, Bodegas Roda also started to produce a white wine. This wine is around 90 to 95% Viura, but it comes from an extremely old vineyard that was planted as a field blend, so they're not really positive of the precise variety breakdown. This wine matures for 18 months in 500-liter oak casks, and then another 18 months in bottle before its release. They produce around 25,000 bottles of it per year, and this wine sells for around $90 per bottle. This was definitely an extremely impressive wine and one of my favorite white wines of the trip. I should mention that I tried 2 different vintages, both the 2021 and the 2022, and I did find some stylistic differences, at least with respect to the bottles that I tried. Specifically, I found the 2021 to be a little bit more oxidative in style. In contrast, the 2022 vintage was definitely a little bit more fruit-forward and had less of the oxidative quality to it. Next up is Compañía Vinícola del Norte de España, or CVNE for short. This is a historic winery that was founded way back in 1879. While Cune is perhaps extremely well known for some wines that offer compelling value and some daily drinking wines, they also have some impressive higher-end wines. In this video, I'll discuss 3 of the standouts. The first of which is a red wine that was produced beginning in 1999 in honor of the original founders. This is the Rioja DOCa, and I tried the highly acclaimed 2021 vintage. This wine is always 100% Tempranillo. The fruit for this wine comes from a high elevation vineyard that's planted on the hillside of a mountain. As such, it's a cooler area, and the grapes tend to be extremely elegant with lots of acidity and freshness. This wine features flavors and aromas of mixed red and black fruit, floral notes, and an intriguing alpine quality, sort of like what I get when I taste high-quality Pinot Noir from Switzerland. Next up is one of the more intriguing wines that I had on my entire trip to Spain. The fruit for this wine comes from a small 2-hectare parcel that's located in the foothills of the Sierra Cantabria Mountains. The Viura grapes that are planted in this vineyard receive some mist in the evenings that lasts until the following morning. As such, they even develop some botrytis. So this is a late harvest wine that actually includes some botrytis grapes in it as well. But during the fermentation process, they leave only around 30 grams per liter of residual sugar. Compared to Sauternes, for example, Sauternes will have more like 120 to 220 grams per liter. So this definitely doesn't have nearly as much sweetness as something like Sauternes. This wine is the Corona Gran Reserva, and I tried the highly acclaimed 2017 vintage. Following fermentation, this wine matures for around 6 years in French oak. This wine was extraordinarily complex, and it kept evolving in the glass as long as I was able to follow it, which was probably about an hour or so. Really a special wine, and one that I would encourage you to try if you're able to track it down. I'm a huge fan of Spanish white wines, and Cuné's Monopole brand has produced some of my favorite white wines going back many years. So it was a real treat to taste the 2016 Monopole Blanco Gran Reserva. This wine is predominantly Viura. As with the Corona Gran Reserva, this is a wine that matures for 60 months in oak barrels, all of which are neutral. This wine is bone dry, with flavors and aromas of apple, pear, blossom, and there's a salty quality to it that I found to be quite intriguing as well. There's ample acidity and a long, complex finish. This is another wine that was extremely well received by critics, and one that you should definitely try if you get a chance to do so. This is an extremely special white wine, and one that sells for around $100 in the United States, but probably much less than that in Europe. Cuné's leadership and management has been extremely savvy, and one of the best acquisitions they made over the years was the purchase of Vinedos del Contino, which I'll call Contino for short. Contino was founded back in 1973, and it's known for being one of the very first producers in Rioja that made wine exclusively from fruit that was grown on its estate. So more of a chateau concept, which was extremely unusual in Rioja. Contino is located in Alavesa, and it has 62 hectares of vineyards. Contino is located in an extremely special location, and regardless of vintage, the grapes here seem to be able to get consistently ripe year after year. These wines are made in a more modern, fruity style, and I find them to be absolutely delicious. I'm a huge fan of pretty much everything they make. Several years ago, I did an extremely in-depth tasting with a winemaker where I tried pretty much every wine that they make. This year, I didn't have as much time to taste through their lineup, but I did try 6 or 7 of the wines. One of the things I find particularly intriguing about Contino is that they're one of the very few producers that make single variety wines from grapes like Graciano, Garnacha, and Mizuelo. So if you're interested in seeing for yourself what each of those varieties tastes like individually, that's an excellent opportunity for you to do so. While I enjoyed the entire lineup, there were definitely 2 standouts in the wines that I tried, one of which was not even at the higher end of their range. This was the 2021 Contino Rioja Reserva Tinto. This wine was extraordinarily elegant and smooth. The other standout is one of my all-time favorite Rioja wines. This is the 2022 Contino Viña del Olivo. The fruit for this aptly named wine comes from vines that are located near an extremely old olive tree. The winemaker explained that the fruit in this area is extraordinarily complex because there's a variety of diverse soil types. The river is located quite close to it, so you can get some sandy soils, but there's also some rocky soils and some other different types of terrain as well. And by blending the fruit from these diverse soil types, you're able to achieve a wine with a tremendous sense of place and lots of complexity. This is a powerful, concentrated wine, but one that's also extraordinarily elegant. If you have not tried any of the Viña del Olivo wines from Contino, I strongly recommend that you do so. This is a wine that sells for right around $100 per bottle, but it's absolutely well worth it, and it's always an extremely memorable experience. Bodegas Muga is a family-owned producer that was started back in the 1930s and which has a substantial emphasis on quality. They like to control all aspects of their operation. In fact, they even have their own cooperage, which produces a whopping 700 barrels per year. While I was there, I had the opportunity to see their coopers in action, and they were even toasting some of their barrels, which was interesting to watch. While Bodegas Muga embraces traditional winemaking principles, they also utilize modern state-of-the-art technology in the production of their wines. For example, they use optical sorting equipment to ensure that their red wines only include the highest quality fruit, and that any fruit that doesn't meet their standards is excluded from their blends. Following my tour of the winery, I was able to sit down for a tasting of 6 different Bodegas Muga wines. Bodegas Muga produces between 1.5 to 2 million bottles of wine annually. They don't necessarily produce all their wines every vintage, but certainly their biggest production wine is the Bodegas Muga Reserva, which sometimes goes by Bodegas Muga Crianza in the local market. This is a wine that they produce each and every vintage, and they produce a lot of it, so it should be easy to track down. Specifically, they produce between 800 and 900,000 bottles of this wine annually. It's an extraordinary value, particularly in Europe, where it sells for less than 20 euros per bottle. Unfortunately, in the United States, it costs closer to $40 per bottle. This is a traditional Rioja that's a blend that consists of Tempranillo, Garnacha, Graciano, and Mizuelo. It matures for 2 years in oak, 80% of which is French and 20% of which is American. Moving up the Bodegas Muga quality pyramid for red wines, the next wine that I tasted was the Bodegas Muga Selección Especial from the 2020 vintage. Selección Especial is a wine that is produced only in top vintages. This wine comes from a strict selection of fruit from some of the Bodegas Muga top vineyards. These vineyards feature old vines, and they're planted on steep hillsides at high elevation. These sites tend to have poorer soils and better drainage. The result is lower yields and high-quality fruit. This is a wine that I featured on this channel many times, and in vintages when it's produced, I definitely recommend getting the Selección Especial rather than the Reserva, particularly because you can oftentimes find it selling for around $40 to $50 per bottle in the United States, which is either about the same price as the Reserva or just a slight premium. Next up is the Bodegas Muga Prado Enia Gran Reserva. I tasted the excellent 2016 vintage at the winery, but I understand that the 2019 vintage will be coming out soon as well. You can't go wrong with either one of them. It's made from pretty much the same blend that goes into the Bodegas Muga Reserva, but the fruit sources are quite different. This is a wine that comes from some of their very oldest vineyards, which average an impressive 60 years of age. These old vineyards are mostly planted at high elevation sites that average around 500 meters above sea level and have western aspect. They use an extremely strict selection of fruit for this wine. They mature this wine for around 36 months in oak barrels, only 10% of which is new. This is a wine that you can enjoy on release, but it will also cruise in your cellar for up to 20 years, so it gives you lots of flexibility in your cellar. If you're looking to try some white Rioja or even a rosé, Bodegas Muga has some excellent options as well. I tried 2 different white wines when I was there, the first of which is the Bodegas Muga Rioja Blanco. This is a fresh, fruity, approachable wine that's very enjoyable. This wine sells for as little as 12 euros in Europe, which makes it a compelling value, and closer to $20 in the United States. This wine is 70% Viura, but also includes some Garnacha Blanca and some Malvasia. They produce more than 300,000 bottles of this wine annually, so it should be easy to track down. They also make a Reserva Blanco that's called Florida Muga. The primary difference between the 2 wines is the quality of the fruit. They use some of their highest quality Viura to go into this wine. This high quality Viura comes from some of their oldest vines and highest elevations, and they also use a very strict selection of fruit for this wine. This excellent Reserva Blanco has been produced every vintage since 2018, and I'm definitely a big fan of it, as it offers a big step up from their entry-level white wine. They only produce about 25 to 30,000 bottles of this wine, and this one sells for around $50 to $55 per bottle in the United States. At Bodegas Muga, I also tasted the 2024 Rosé, which is a blend of Viura and Garnacha Tinto. This is a fresh, fruity wine that features flavors and aromas of strawberry, and it has ample acidity. It's a refreshing wine that's very light in color, much like some of the rosé from Provence. I found out that half of this wine is sold domestically in Spain, and the rest of it is exported. This wine sells for an extremely reasonable €9.50 in Europe, or around $17 or $18 in the United States. I've published a number of other videos on Rioja and Spanish wines generally that I'll link in the description below. But if you'd like to learn more about Priorat, which is another outstanding region in Spain, please be sure to check out this video that's linked above.